anyone else wishing to address the commission? Seeing none, thank you for coming out. We appreciate it very, very much, your comments and thoughts. Thank you. I have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
There's a motion by Commissioner Becker, second by Commissioner Merman, to approve the consent agenda. Seeing no further discussion, please record the vote.
Motion carried 6-0.
Thank you. We have no public hearings today, so we move to regular agenda. Ms. Doherty.
Thank you, Commissioner Miller. Rick Shantz will be providing us with an update on the Morris Bridge Sink water use permit intent to issue.
Morning, Commissioners. Rick Shantz from the EPC Legal Department. We've been hearing from some of the speakers this morning about the Morris Bridge Sink, and so we're going to give you a little more detail on this and tell you what permit is pending so we understand what's going on. First of all, you have also heard that the area that this land is on, it is owned by the Southwest Florida Water Management District. It is designated as the Lower Hillsborough River Wilderness Preserve, and the Natural Resource Conservation is the stated goal of the district for this preserve. And it does have many miles of riverine wetlands for the Hillsborough River and for Cowhouse Creek on this property, as well as what you've heard, 69 acres of 3 separate isolated wetlands. And as Ms. Kemp just stated, there is the wood stork rookery, bogs, 2 sinkholes. It's just it's a very important component and one of the largest wetland wildlife corridors we have in the region. It's a very unique geological resource. Just to orient you, there's I-75 and east of I-75 is where Morris Bridge Road starts, and so you can see the tag there, the Morris Bridge. This is a diagram from the 2009 Swift Mud pump test, and right where this yellow line starts is where the sinkhole is, and the pumping occurred during the pump test in 2009. And this yellow line shows the temporary route of the piping to the Tampa Bypass Canal. That's not necessarily the permanent piping route, but just to show you how it worked the first time. And this is the location of the Morris Bridge sinkhole. The issue we're talking about here is that the Water Management District is seeking a water use permit from the Department of Environmental Protection to help augment the lower Hillsborough River and the flows from into the lower Hillsborough River. Lower Hillsborough River, as you know, starts at the City of Tampa's dam, and it goes downstream through downtown into Tampa Bay. Normally, the Water Management District is the entity that issues water use permits. They issue potable water supply permits to the City of Tampa and to Tampa Bay Water, as well as to industry and agriculture. But in this case, since they are the ones seeking water use from a site on their property for augmentation purposes, they have to apply to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to get a water use permit. It's kind of a reversal of roles here. Just so you know, there are 3 other sources of water already permitted that go toward this same purpose, the purpose of reaching the minimum flows of the lower Hillsborough River. And that is permitted supplies from Sulphur Springs, from the Tampa Bypass Canal, and from the Blue Sink. And now the Water Management District has obligation to make sure that they have enough water in all sorts of drought conditions. They feel it's necessary, this is in their opinion, to add another source here. What has happened so far is that the department on December 4th issued a notice of intent to issue this water use permit in these quantities that are shown on the screen. Over the year, they can average 2,071,000 gallons per day, every day, if they average that over the water year. But on a daily basis, they can pump close to 4 million gallons a day, and they can pump 3.9 million gallons a day for 30 straight days monthly. As long as they meet, that 2 million gallon average for the year, they can pump it pretty hard at certain times of the year and at certain times according to the terms of this permit. And it's those quantities that we're concerned with. And here is a photo of the 2009 pump test that Swiftmud conducted. And what they did here for this test was install a temporary pump and held it in place by the cables you see, and then the piping goes out to the bypass canal, and they installed a concrete footing for some electrical equipment. The plans in place for a permanent structure at the Morris Bridge sink would be a permanent pump, more concrete footers for the cables to be attached to that would hold a permanent pump in place, and then fencing off of portions of the sinkhole. You know, getting into the quantities and where our concerns arise is that in the year 2000, Tampa Bay Water, experiencing some severe drought conditions, went to some temporary pumping here at the Morris Bridge sink. And for 10 weeks, they pumped at 6.7 million gallons per day. And what happened at that time when they kept the data, the sink itself was drawn down 7 feet. The nursery sink, which is nearby, is the other sinkhole there, was drawn down 2.6 feet. The upper Florida aquifer, about 500 yards away from the actual pump site, was drawn down 4 feet. 13 wells had to be replaced by residents whose only source of water is their potable water wells. Tampa Bay Water had to mitigate and drill those wells deeper because they went dry. That's what happened in 2000. In 2009, the Water Management District was still looking at this site again for augmentation purposes for the river, and they decided to do another pump test. And for 30 days, they pumped it at 4 million gallons a day, which is the upper limits of the permit that's being proposed here. The sink itself was drawn down 2.1 feet right there at the sink. The difference here with the test and what is proposed in the permit is that the test ended in 30 days, or in the year 2000, 10 weeks. The potential here is for very long periods of time that the sink could be pumped at these levels. So although pumping at lower levels than what was done in 2000 wouldn't cause as much impact, you can pump it longer. Some data was collected as when would we need to go to use this sink, because as I said, 3 other sources are used before the Morris Bridge sink would be used. First it's Sulphur Springs, then the bypass canal, and then the Blue Sink, and then they would get to Morris Bridge. And what they did was go back and look 5 years. The Water Management District said over 5 years, if we had the Morris Bridge sink in place, what would we have pumped it at? In some years you wouldn't have had to pump it at all because you had a lot of rain, had a lot of water coming down the Hillsborough River, going over the dam after the city of Tampa takes the water out for use. You wouldn't have to pump it at all. The other 3 sources would be fine. But they found 1 year where 172 days the Morris Bridge sink would have been pumped. And it could be, you know, again, at these levels. And so they don't know what impacts would occur at you know, at that amount of pumping. And that's the concern, because the permit is designed to only pump this sink during dry and drought conditions. And that's a problem, because the sink itself and the wetlands surrounding it are also going to be stressed during that time period. So it's designed to pump a source that is already going to be stressed, because the whole area is going to be stressed because it won't be pumped unless you're in a drought to start with. And the effects of this pumping are going to be felt directly, because this sink is 200 feet deep and it's directly connected to the Florida aquifer. So it's not like you're pumping a surface water, it's like you're pumping directly groundwater. So you're going to have to see some effects pretty quickly. Evidence of impacts show up in the concern of the Department of Environmental Protection just by the way the terms and conditions they put in this proposed permit. And again, permit was, the status of the permit is that it's issued, intent to issue. If you don't file, if someone doesn't file a petition by Christmas Eve, maybe it's 25th, 26th, it's an odd date that falls right on the holidays, then it'll go final. And so that's what everybody is concerned about. So, but when you look at the terms of the proposed permit itself, you see that it is, which in one sense is good. It is filled with monitoring conditions by the water management district once they're pumping, and it's filled with mitigation conditions. Some of the monitoring that's going to have to occur is that there's going to have to be daily water collection samples at the marshes and 2 sinks, daily water collection at 3 wetlands, daily aquifer collection at 10 different points. Some of the mitigation that's going to have to occur is it's written into the permit itself that if adverse impacts occur to environmental features, such as the levels, water levels in the sinks, the wetlands, the streams, if there are damage to crops around farmers in the surrounding area, if there's damage to habitat of endangered species, or if you have to repair domestic wells. All of that is put in there as requirements of the permit. And so you think that that's good, but when you start to look at this legally, that's where we have concern, because you have to, when you issue a permit, when anyone issues a permit, you have to have reasonable assurances that this is a reasonable beneficial use of water, and you have to have reasonable assurances that you're not going to affect any existing legal users of water. So when you look at the way that the permit was created, is this a reasonable beneficial use of water? You think about it, where the water management district would be, or the department in this case would be requiring mitigation for pumping a source that is itself used for mitigation for something else. And so where do you find the mitigation for the damages and impacts that might occur from pumping the Mooresbridge sink? Because you're using that to correct some damage because you're taking too much water out of the Hillsborough River. So is that really a reasonable beneficial use? You have to ask yourself that. Is it, the case law requires that up front, you have to have reasonable assurances that you're not going to affect any legal existing use of water. And we already know that pumping at higher levels anyway cause damage to residential wells. It's the only source of water for those people that live in the area because they're not hooked up to public supply. So there's a case that could be made that the permit itself is sort of indicating that they don't have the reasonable assurances that you're not going to be affecting either the biology of the area or the legal existing uses in the area. So what we would like to have is the opportunity before this permit goes goes final, is to sit down with the water management district staff, sit down with the DEP staff, and talk about these issues. But with the time frames, they're getting tight. So we're not going to really ask the board for any vote today, but we would like your input today if you'd like to give it. But the recommendation that the staff has for you is that the staff would file an extension of time in which to extend the time that petitions need to be filed for this. And we would do that very, very quickly here. And that would give everybody time to do some talking. During that time, staff would do 2 things. We would further evaluate the technical aspects of this permit, find out why the district thinks that this can be pumped at these levels without any harm. And we'd like to dig into that and look into those technical aspects. Secondly, we'd also like to talk to them about other conditions if the permit ever does go forward, which we hope it doesn't. But because there's a lot of monitoring here and there's a lot of requirements for mitigation, but it never says, when you see this impact, you will stop pumping, or you will do this. Because soil subsidence and tree rot and cypress trees falling over, once that happens, it takes an awful long time to repair that damage, if ever. And so we don't see those conditions in there, as to what trigger you would have to cease pumping once you see impact starting to occur, and that permit's silent on that. And then after we do that, we would then come back to the commission and recommend whether we feel we have to go forward with an actual challenge, and we would, the executive director actually has that authority, but in a case like this, we would like to bring it to the board and get your input on it before we did that. So that's what we're asking for today. Would be, I know that Ms. Dougherty does want to say a few things before the discussion opens up. So,
Dougherty?
Thank you, Commissioner Miller. First, I'd like to read to you a guidance on groundwater augmentation of surface waters. This was produced on March 23rd, 2012 by the FDEP, and it says the following. In implementing consumptive use permitting programs, the department and districts shall strive to prevent harm to natural systems without the need for artificial maintenance of natural systems by pump groundwater augmentation. And that's what we're talking about today. It goes on further to talk about long-term augmentation of wetlands or other surface waters with pumped groundwater should be avoided. So that comes directly from the FDEP. This Morris Bridge, this consumptive use permit, was taken up by two different governing boards. I was on one at the time. The subsequent board voted it down. It had staff recommendation, but they just didn't think that it was a sound, sustainable practice to grant that consumptive use permit. The other thing is this is the Northern Tampa Bay Water Use Caution Area, and it prevents legal existing users in the area from getting any groundwater. Large agriculture people, there were individuals that actually had to bring water in from outside the county during the drought of 2000. But the water use caution area lets you know that there's saltwater intrusion. And the last thing that we need is saltwater intrusion into our freshwater system. This is a pristine ecotourism spot. We talk about ecotourism all the time in the county. And to me, the headwaters of the Hillsborough River are the jewel of the county. It's a large wetland system and it needs protection. Mr. Joyner cannot be here today. His well has been impacted twice. And he says none of the well owners or anybody out there knows anything about this Morris Bridge sink issue to intent. He found out about it, and Tampa Bay Water did give him a new well, but then when they pumped the second time, his well had issues, and they provided him with a filter system for 2 years, and then now he has to continue to filter his water because of the water quality. There's potentials for sinkholes, and I think, from my perspective, it just doesn't make common sense to impact this pristine wetland system to mitigate for environmental damage on the lower end of the river. And obviously, I've said it before, all the counties came together for Tampa Bay Water years ago in 1991. Everyone, Hillsborough County included, gave up their quantities. Hillsborough County has all of the regional systems. And the taxpayers paid $1 billion for those systems so that we would not create environmental damage and we would not pump out of sinks and springs. So our intent is to work with SwiftMud and DEP. We do have delegation and memorandums of understandings. We've had conversations with Michael Babb, Robert Beltran. We'll be meeting with their scientists next week. But certainly we take this very seriously and we're concerned about our environment.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Doherty, thank you very much for the presentation. Commissioner White, you're recognized.
Thank you. Mr. Shantz, can you put the recommendation screen back up?
It's up on
Your recommendations to the board. There we go. Okay, so it's my understanding that, this is just in layman's terms, but we could essentially file a challenge as a placeholder, right? And
Yes.
remove that challenge if we're satisfied with any conditions that might be added to the permit.
You could. My only concern with that is that we have enough data right now to do a good petition. Placeholder petitions have been filed though. One of the things that we would do automatically is when we seek in bullet number 1, when we seek the extension, we would say if this extension is not granted, please consider this as our petition.
So what concerns
me?
me?
Bare bones petition, but sometimes that is enough to hold the time frame.
So what concerns me with bullet point number 4 to come back to the commission with a final recommendation regarding the challenge, if they say no, we won't grant an extension, then the deadline's next week, right?
Yes, sir.
So the board would have to be called into a special called meeting or something like that.
Well, and not really, because if we get the flavor and appetite of the board right now, as I said, Janet Dougherty can file a petition on her own. We do not, unlike the civil suit that we had earlier this morning, we don't need the board's permission under the act to file petitions against permits, only for filing lawsuits. So we can act quickly. And like I said, this filing for the extension of time